We'll get the meeting going, and any changes to the agenda? I'm assuming not. Do we have any public out there for public comment?
Mariel Matthews is on the line with Winooski Partnership for Prevention. I don't know, Mariel, if there's anything you wanted to say, you can raise your hand or use the chat. Otherwise, we can recognize you later in the meeting if you're here for something specific. Oh, there's a hand. So, okay, you can unmute yourself, Mariel.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Mariel Matthews, use she, her pronouns. I'm actually not here for anything specific, but didn't want to wait to introduce myself and just be listening in to you all without you knowing who I am. I'm a policy and grants manager at Winooski Partnership for Prevention, generally interested in things related to substance use disorder prevention. So great, hoping to be able to meet you all on a different setting, but looking forward to hearing about the work plan. Thanks.
Marielle, if you want to add anything during the meeting, just raise your hand and Eric will recognize you, because I can't see.
Awesome. All
I
right.
probably could if I knew how to use the computer, but
Will do. Thank you.
okay. All right. No other public out there?
There is not. Hang on, Abby's got something in the chat here. So she's going to switch computers, it looks like. She's having challenges with her camera.
We will hang on for a second.
Yep.
Cue the Jeopardy music.
It's funny you say that, Mike. Last week and this week, my law firm did our annual client seminar. It's sort of like an annual update on employment law issues. And as part of that, I had to host Wage and Hour Jeopardy. So that was kind of fun.
So you can hum the theme song for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or not.
I've been saying for a while, I used to watch the news and now I watch Jeopardy.
I've watched a couple of the celebrity Jeopardy shows. The questions seem just so easy.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the Saturday Night Live skits about those?
Yeah.
Well, they don't want to embarrass anybody, you know. I feel like
to look stupid, right?
Right. Okay, it looks like Abby's back with us.
She is. I'm not sure if she's fully joined in yet and can hear or see us yet, since she's off video and off mic. Ah, there we go.
she is.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
So Abby, we're ready to adjourn. Sorry you missed the whole meeting.
Hey, nice seeing everyone.
Okay, so we'll pick up on item 4, which is approval of the previous meeting minutes. Looking for a motion and a second. Motion to be approved minutes with any corrections or edits.
It was a slim group last time, or a limited group, I should say.
I saw that.
I'll move.
Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a second for that.
It's got to be Connor or Mike,
Connor
right?
is the only one. You know, it doesn't have to be, but if Connor would, since he was there.
I read them, they sound good.
So Connor second. I see a finger up from Connor, so he's seconding it.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, Joe.
Nothing important.
Right. Anyone have any questions or edits or comments about the minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor, please say aye or raise your hand. Aye. Anyone oppose? Anyone wish to abstain?
Never know what the protocol is for abstaining. Like, is that the most appropriate thing to do if you're not there?
So
There's nothing. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
well, no, I was just going to say, so technically the minutes are simply a reflection of the business that occurred at the meeting. So you can, even if you weren't at the meeting, you can still vote on the minutes. There's no reason for somebody to abstain just because they weren't at the meeting. It's really more, it's more of a choice. So you can choose to abstain, but if you think that what's represented accurately or somewhat accurately describes the business of the previous meeting, then there's nothing that prohibits you from voting on the minutes, even if you did not attend.
And I will just add, if you want to abstain, there's nothing wrong with it, so don't feel
Exactly.
bad about abstaining. So any abstentions? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to approval of the draft FY 2023 work plan.
Okay, so at our last meeting, let me back up a couple steps here. We did present several months ago, it's probably been quite a few months ago now, a draft work plan. That we didn't take any action on that because there was going to be a meeting of the council liaisons for each commission and the chairs of each commission to talk about any type of issues or items that each commission wanted to discuss over the year that there might be some joint interest. So that meeting occurred prior to our last meeting. The work plan was updated briefly or lightly to reflect some of the discussions and the changes based off of the joint meeting. The draft work plan that's in your packet was presented at our last meeting, but since there was only 3 members in attendance, we decided to hold off on approval of it until this meeting when more of you would be here to have any additional discussion or additional input or questions. A lot of what's in here is fairly consistent with what we've done over the last several years, just kind of shifting things around a little bit. I should also note that these are in no particular order of hierarchy. So item 1 does not necessarily mean that's the first thing we're going to be working on. It's more just a list of the various work plan items that we have. So
Eric,
that's a little-
let me interrupt you for a second. Just wonder if everyone has that in front of them or if they'd like Eric to put it up on the screen for us.
Right.
Put it up. I mean, I have it, but I feel like it's usually helpful to
Sure.
share it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yep, let me go ahead and share here. Get my screens reconfigured. One moment, please. Okay. Yep. So here's our draft work plan. Item 1, evaluating incentives for development priorities. Here we're looking at, we had a lot of these items on the list previously, but now we're adding in, I believe we added in parking reform and energy efficiency and sound mitigation into that list. We've done work on affordable housing, on multi-bedroom units. We are working on historic preservation. Multimodal transportation is still forthcoming. So basically similar to what we've seen in the past for development incentives. Item 2 is updates on parking. Now that we have the parking study completed, that's given us some more information on what we may look at for updates to parking, either management, either management of those spaces, the quantity of required parking, on-street, off-street, things of that nature. So we'll get into some of those, hopefully we'll get into some of those discussions tonight with the review of Article 4, which does now include information on parking. So that's included the review of protection for historic resources. This is kind of taking a bit of a different shift. At the last meeting, I presented some new information, so I'll do some refreshing for those of you that weren't at that meeting tonight, just to kind of get us all up to speed on where things are, what needs to be done, what has been done, what could be done related to historic resource protection. And then just general zoning updates, looking at things like racial equity, protection of natural resources, incentives for childcare options, all things that we've heard are important for the community and potentially either lacking or needed. So more just general updates for what that, how to address those components and others too. That's not obviously an exhaustive list or the only items we would work on. And I believe that is it. So again, fairly basic, but yes, Mike.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Oh.
You said racial equity. I'm not sure, was it the last meeting we introduced the fact that we have a equity, whatever you call it?
Yes,
So
yeah, I'm glad you brought that
just-
up. Yeah, I meant to bring that up. So the Commission on Equity and Belonging that's been formed by the City Council they have, the members of that commission are, I don't want to say assigned, but they've selected ambassadors to attend all of the other commission meetings. So the Commission on Inclusion and Belonging will meet, they will meet as a group on even numbered months, and on odd numbered months, their members will attend the other meetings. So our representative is Bruce Wilson. So at our first meeting in November, he will be in attendance with us. Their role is kind of really going to be up to the individual commission. However, with our commission, we have some limitations because of our statutory, because we are a statutory entity, or you all are a statutory entity for the Planning Commission. So some commissions may allow their ambassadors to vote, others may not and just be advisory. In our case, the ambassador won't be able to vote because statute specifically outlines who is eligible to vote on the Planning Commission. Specifically, statute says that in order to vote on the Planning Commission, you have to be an appointed planning commissioner by the elected body. So because Bruce will just be basically a liaison and ambassador, he will not be able to vote. However, having said that, the mayor and I met with him yesterday just to talk through some of what the Planning Commission is working on and what's to be expected. And we did encourage him, just like with our alternate members, to participate actively and openly with all of our discussions. So, you know, more to come on that when Bruce actually is able to attend a meeting with us. I believe they're actually meeting right now tonight as well, their commission. So, but again, they'll only be joining us in the odd numbered months. So.
What if we have more than one meeting a month?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not exactly sure how some of that's going to work out logistically. I know we did talk about that with Bruce a little bit, and I know Mike and I have talked about that a little bit as well. So I think a lot of what's going to happen is still being figured out. I think because it's so new, their commission, the Commission on Inclusion and Belonging, is still kind of figuring out what their roles are going to be as well in their own commission structure. So I think, I don't know, this may have, it may be a learning curve for everybody.
Okay.
So anyway, there's a little bit about, that's a little bit about the liaison role or the ambassador role, but also any questions about the work plan from anyone?
Anyone have anything on their mind that they didn't see in the work plan that they want to talk about?
Mike, this is Tommy. Just a question for the group. When we're looking at this work plan, most of the things I see in there become interwoven with whatever we're working on. You can't sort and parcel some of this stuff. It just is. But having said that, does the group feel that there's a priority of what we want to accomplish first or most critically?
Good question. Anyone have any thoughts?
I guess if I could just jump in quick. I mean, I think the historic preservation piece and some of the parking we are working on currently with our review of Article 4. So, I mean, I don't know if that necessarily makes them a priority, but those are two items that we're already engaging with right now. So I anticipate that we will, if we continue working through Article 4, I anticipate that there will be some movement on addressing those two items for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, I think we should stay in that track.
That sounds reasonable. It seems like we're kind of close to coming to some resolution on that.
Yeah, and parking too. We've discussed that for
Right.
many years. Yeah.
Okay. So we're looking to approve this work plan, right?
Ideally, yes,
Eric?
there'd be an approval of the work plan. And again, I should also just mention, you know, this is really more of just a guidance document. It's not, if we don't accomplish something, that's fine. It's more just to give us some general direction of how to accomplish our master plan goals, which is why those are also identified in the work plan document.
And at the same time, if something should come up that's not on this work plan that is identified as a priority, we have the option of taking that on.
That's correct. Yep. Yep.
Would anyone like to make a motion to approve this, or Eric, do we just need a consensus?
Either way, I think is fine.
All right, well, let me just ask, is everyone okay with this work plan as presented?
Yes.
Oh, fine with me.
Okay. Let's just leave it at that, then. It's a consensus of approval.
Okay, sounds
That
great.
makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. Before we leave this, any other comments? Everyone's good with where we're at? Okay. Let's move to continued discussion on Article 4.
All right. So I'm going to start sharing my screen again. Just a different screen this time. So, okay, we're picking up again on our discussion of Article 4, which is our general use regulations. So at the last meeting, I provided some information on a different approach to addressing historic resources. So I'll go over that information when we get to that section 4.4 in the regulations or in this draft. But in the meantime, I just wanted to note that there are some other sections that were also amended based off of the discussions we had at the last meeting. So the first one being section 4.1 item C. I added in some additional language on the interest of and the goals and objectives in the master plan that talk about historic preservation, and just making sure that that's in the forefront here. So I know, Mike, this was something, Mike and Sarah, you guys both were interested in having this language, I'll say, beefed up a bit. So I don't know if what I've drafted here meets that, or if it still needs work, but that is one of the first items that has changed since the last time the full group discussed this.
It looked okay to me as I read it. Since it's just kind of an intro.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's more in section 4.4 as well. There's some additional language there also. So any questions on that?
Good.
Okay, and I'll just keep rolling through as we've done in the past. Unless there's any questions, please stop me if you have any questions. And Marielle, I'd also say to you, if you have anything you want to add, just use the raise hand and we'll recognize you. So let's see, moving through on page 2 here. None of this has changed at the bottom of page 2 under residential driveways. That's still the same language that you've seen previously. Similarly, this item 3 that's stricken, that has the strikeout, is moved to a different section. So we're not eliminating it, but just moving it. That's why it's shown in the strikeout. No change here from previous versions.
Eric?
Yes.
I want to stop you, and I don't know if I can't remember talking about this before, and I guess I went over it. I'm just the access driveway widths.
Where you looking?
I'm on F multifamily and non-residential driveways.
Got it.
You've got those figures.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
They and I think you have. Are there figures for maybe residential driveways as well? I guess this is it.
Yes.
It seemed when I looked at this earlier, kind of confusing. Because it says too narrow, but is it like one lane? That's why it's too narrow. Additional width, you've got 25-foot maximum. What's the minimum? You know what I mean? I didn't know.
Right.
When I read it, I'm thinking, shouldn't there be a minimum maximum width?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, these are all figures that have just been carried through, so I'm not exactly sure where they've originated from, but I can. I mean, we can definitely add in some language that talks about minimums and maximums, and then reference these images or other images.
Yeah, and I go back to when I was on the council, we had a discussion about the turning lane on the corner of East Spring and Main Street on East Spring Street, and complaints that one was 10 feet, one was 9 feet 6 inches. That's too narrow. And what's the requirement? So I could see where someone might come in and say, hey, I only need 8 feet per lane. Well, that may or may not work, but I would think we get some kind of standard in there.
I mean, the only thing I would say is that under item 1 here, we just referenced the standards of Public Works for the widths. They should be constructed to their standards, which would include the width of the driveway as well.
Okay, so I'm not familiar with what those standards are. So if those have minimum widths and whatnot, then we're fine.
Yeah, I believe they do. I want to say the minimum driveway width is 20 feet.
So I would just in these figures, maybe if you can throw that in.
Yep,
You know,
I can
so it's
check.
right there.
I'll check with Public Works to see what they have as their minimum and
Okay.
maximum, and then see what I can do about adding that data into the figures.
All right.
Yeah, and particularly because this middle figure has this 25, which, I mean, if that's the maximum width in those standards, that's fine, but I don't want there to be like an inconsistency, I
Right.
guess.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yep. Okay. Anything else on that?
No.
All right, great. So moving along, again, just some headings to relate to what the figures are. Nothing changed, no new changes here. No new changes here. So this is where the previous section was moved to. So now we're talking about encroachment of existing driveways. That I is new language to this section, not new to you all, as we've reviewed this previously. And 1, 2, 3, and 4 is all what was in the previous section that's been moved here. So nothing new there as well. Okay, moving along. Under 4.3, nothing here has changed for conversion or change of use. That's all still the same as it was previously. And then we get into section 4.4. So this is where some of the bigger changes have occurred for those of you that weren't at the last meeting. So Connor and Sarah and Mike, this should be somewhat of a refresher for you all, but for those of you that were not here, I did some research on why we have this section on design review. Statute is pretty clear that in order to have any type of design review standards, whether they be design review, architectural review, historic review, there needs to be some sort of district that's associated with that. Whether that be a design review district, a historic review district, whatever the case might be, there needs to be a district that associates to the standards. What I was able to determine, and to the best of my ability, and I'm pretty sure this is what the case was, prior to the full revamp of the land use regulations that incorporated the form-based code and made it a unified land use and development regulations. Previously, there was a zoning ordinance and a subdivision ordinance. When we had that previous zoning ordinance, we did have design review districts. There was, I think, at least 2 design review districts. And so these standards were fairly consistent with the 2014 version of the language. So what it seems to have happened is the design review language came forward in section 4.4, but the districts went away. So there was nowhere for these standards to apply. So in some of my discussions with the state, with the Division of Historic Preservation and just review of statute, in order for us to have any type of local historic protection, we need to have some sort of historic district. It doesn't necessarily need to be called a historic district, but there needs to be some sort of area where the standards will apply. So we would need to both create the area for the standards to apply and create the standards that would apply to that area. Along with that, if we're looking at it from a historic perspective, I believe we would need to do updated surveys and inventories of the properties that are in that area to make sure that it's, if in the case of historic preservation, that it still meets the criteria to be listed. As we've talked in the past, pretty much all the surveys we have on file for any of our historic properties that are listed either in the state or national register are all from 1979. So some of those properties don't exist, some have been changed. New properties may have met the threshold of 50 years now to be eligible. So in order to, I guess that's all a long way of saying, for us to put in some sort of design review or protection for historic resources that would either prevent or limit demolition of buildings, it requires a lot more work than just to put some language into the regulations. So with that in mind, what we talked about at the last meeting and what I've tried to do is, instead of looking at ways to regulate these properties, look at incentives that might help save them while we work to figure out the resources necessary to establish some historic protections or design review districts, or whatever direction we might go in. Look at an incentive-based approach to help provide incentives to the development community or property owners that may prevent them or give them a second thought about whether or not they raise a building or try to reuse it to the extent that they can. So that's why the language is written in here the way it is now, that it's kind of a shift from protection from demolition or alteration and more of an incentive as a way to try to protect and encourage the buildings either be reused or saved in some other manner. So
Hey, Eric?
Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, and I guess it went right over my head if we've talked about it before, but excuse me, in the previous zoning regulations in 2014, you said we had 2 design review districts.
I think there were 2. There was at least 1. I know that.
Okay, so my recollection, and I believe Tommy was chairman of the planning commission when we redid the zoning, and she can chime in if I recollect incorrectly. We were relying on the fact that we had written into the zoning regs that historic structures would have to get approval of the Vermont Division of Historic Preservation or whatever before they could be torn down if they were on the historic register.
Right.
And I suspect that's why those design review districts got dropped. I don't know if it was, I can't recall if it was intentional or unintentional. I'm just wondering how hard it would be just to basically say, whoops, that was an oversight. We want to put those back in. Do we still have to go through the steps you outlined?
I think we would, yeah, because they don't exist anymore. The districts don't exist. I think we have to basically start over and recreate the districts and do the survey work to make sure that the properties are still eligible or still contributing, and then figure out what those design review criteria are going to be, as well as figuring out who is going to be responsible for that review, whether that be a new historic resources commission, whether that be some sort of design review commission or design review board.
Yeah.
That would all need to be figured out as well.
I thought I saw Brendan shaking his head when you were saying that in agreement. I don't know if he was or not, but
Yeah, I don't know anything about it, but it was just my instinct is like, well, they're gone. So we'd have to go. It's sad. My instinct is just, we'd have to go through the formalities to create them again.
I guess
That was all.
my interjection here would be that Winooski is a relatively small city. Like what, a little more than a mile? Why can't
Just over.
Yeah, why can't the city be considered a district?
I mean, it could. We could consider the entire city as a district, but again, that would, in order to establish that and to establish design review criteria, whatever that looks like, we would need to figure out who's going to do the review, what they're reviewing against. If it's historic, if it's some sort of historic review, then we need to do a full inventory of all the properties in the city that may be contributing in order to determine if they meet the standards of review. So, I mean, there's
Eric,
definitely a lot of work that would need to be done. And something that Sarah and I have talked about is that, you know, the city could pursue certified local government status, which would open up some funding that would make some of that survey work and some of that other work, provide funding for those efforts. But in order to even get to that step, the city needs to establish some sort of preservation commission or other body that is going to be responsible for this work and establish the guidelines and the review criteria. And right now, it hasn't been identified as a priority for council. Having said that, it is still on the council's policy and priority strategy list. So it just hasn't risen to a high priority for them, but it is still there. So they are aware of it. It is something that we basically talk about it every year when we're going through the review of those strategies.
Therein lies the issue. It
Right.
seems like this will never be prioritized.
Well,
Right.
Like this should have been done like 20 years ago.
yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
this is where Eric and I have talked a couple times about this. And yes, I mean, what's happened in the past, it's not going to be that easy to correct it. It's complicated to do with the state. It's going to be complicated to do with the city. And at this point, it feels like the incentive ideas may be all we have to get something going really quickly. And the incentive, the mayor liked the incentive stuff. I think city council can get behind it. It's hopefully it will just make some creative ideas for some of the architecture in the city. And again, we're talking about, well, the first line there, you know, adaptive reuse. I think it's,
I'm gonna
Let me
Sarah,
interject
Sarah, I would agree that like it's something and it's a step in the right direction, but it doesn't really seem to accomplish what, you know, our master plan indicates.
Yeah, but we're gonna need more manpower basically to work with the mayor and whatnot and say this is really a high priority in the city, and it just doesn't feel we're going to get very far with that at this point.
Let me throw two things out. One, Eric, can you maybe get an opinion from our city attorney about, just to confirm that those districts are gone, we can't just reinstitute them?
Yeah, sure, I can do that.
Yeah, and I say that only because if he says, no, they can still be instituted pretty easily, well, I think that in conjunction with the incentive language is a better step than where we are now. The other thing I want to throw out is, I think if we as a commission feel that this is a priority, let's move on it. We can take it to the council, tell them we feel this is a priority and it's in our work plan. And I'm happy to do that if that's, you know, if we get to that point and that's the feeling of this commission.
You know, I would agree with, I mean, having worked on this for a long time, it's been something that we really wanted to do from the very beginning of changing all of our regulations. And to see that we're still at a place where we can't move doesn't seem like where we want to be. I agree completely that these incentives are great and that we should implement those. I've read them and they seem all reasonable. But as Mike says it and everybody else says, it's a stopgap that doesn't really solve our problems. So I would be strongly in favor of moving this forward to the council to say we feel Winooski has enough historic integrity that we want to preserve, that we need this support in order to do so.
And to the effect that Brendan was talking about last meeting that I attended, it really would apply to a small number of structures.
Right.
Of superior significance.
Well,
Yeah, this was,
the work that Britta did and showed us not too long ago.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I want to ask a very basic like question. So what if tomorrow the owner of the Winooski block said, I want to knock this thing down? Eric, what would stand in their way? Like what is there for protection of like a worst case scenario like that right now?
There's many.
So from a local perspective, there's not much, at least from a local regulatory perspective. We have very limited protections in place. I think the major pushback would be coming from either the state or the federal side, and just community outreach and community grassroots type.
That's soft pressure. That's not
Exactly right.
We know that's not necessarily effective. And you
So
can also, it's not protected, basically.
yeah, so from the perspective of any local protection, there's really limited avenues that we have available.
And what could the state do even?
Wash their hands. Sorry, I'm being.
They won't help us because they say it has to come from the city. The state won't help us.
Yeah, and they'll have an advisory council vote on it. And even if they vote to keep it on a state historic register, the developer can have an agreement with DHP to say, well, we'll take steps to mitigate adverse effect of the loss of building. So they could put a plaque up on the new building and basically hire a consultant that would document it. And you'd have a file with the state that said what used to be there, but you'd still lose that cultural resource.
And even the National Register, which it's on, I believe, right, Joe?
Yeah, it is.
There was federal money.
It works similarly. It works similarly. So.
The only thing that I think the feds might be able to do is that if there, as Joe just mentioned, if there were federal monies used for any type of rehabilitation, they may have to pay that back.
So like the mill over here, I think had federal money involved.
I think that is one of the ties that comes with any type of funding that's granted because of the designations.
But would that change though? Would that change though? Because like the Winooski block has changed ownership since like that work was done with federal money like that. I mean, so that wouldn't even necessarily reach back to.
I think it would carry to whoever the new owner is, quite frankly.
Okay.
That I think because the money was used for the building itself, I think the improvements are what they look at. I'm not sure of any of this, so please don't quote me on any of this, but that's my understanding is that if there's federal money involved, there's some recourse that the federal government can take in those instances.
Yeah.
And so Eric, just to your understanding, it's not as if like if this were to happen, like the Vermont Attorney General, like let's say, there was a huge uproar and, we were like, no, the state, you got to step in. It's not like the Attorney General's office could necessarily file like a lawsuit and basically just stop it as far as you know.
Well, I mean,
there would be like a legal basis for them to like do that necessarily.
I mean, I guess Brendan, I would ask you as the attorney,
right.
do you need to have a legal basis to sue somebody?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Like I don't know like what if there is like an interest recognized in state law. Like I don't know because I'm just trying to get a sense of like. This is definitely a priority. I want to understand how thin the line really is, because if it's really that bad, like to me, there are certain buildings in the city that kind of have to be off limits. They're like a relatively small number.
I'd say everything on our logo should be off limits.
Well, Brendan, let me pose this hypothetical to you. There's a very real possibility of St. Stephen's Church being demolished because that church was recently closed. I've said this to other people. What if the shoe was on the other foot and St. Stephen's stayed open, St. Francis closed, and we were talking about the demolition of St. Francis, that would like be a nose job for the face of Winooski. I mean, you'd lose something that was just like so symbolic of the city and recognizable. Like, I mean, it's unfathomable, but it could happen. Like, we have nothing in place here.
You have nothing in place. Yeah.
So let me pose kind of two prongs here. One, I think I don't disagree with anything anybody said as far as the need for some level of local protection. Right now, we can't do that with our current land use regulations. So, but what we can do is incentivize their protection. So I'm almost thinking it may be worth identifying specific buildings or properties or districts that we think, or that you all think are the most critical. So I know VHB did a study with some funding that looked at the gateways for historic structures. We have our existing inventory of historic buildings that are listed, but you know, they're kind of a scattershot throughout the city. So it may be, we may gain more traction by saying these specific properties or specific areas are the most critical for Winooski to protect right now. And we want to create some sort of design review district or whatever it is for those properties and try to move that effort forward. And which may be what we've been talking about the whole time, but really focusing in on what that is and what those properties are, so that it might seem like an easier ask, because we would ultimately have to have the property owners involved in the decisions as well to include their properties in these districts. So you know, it's possible that we could say, you know, all these properties should be in a district, and then those property owners go to council and say, no, we don't want to be in this district, and the boundary lines are redrawn to exclude properties that that should or should not be excluded for their historic quality. So
I don't really get that though, because like how, like the state historic register, like the properties didn't, like the property owners at the time didn't get to say, no, I don't want this to be on the state register.
I think because it's a local, well, I guess the difference that I see is the state and national register is really just an inventory of properties, where the local regulations would have regulatory oversight of those properties as well. So it's both including them, but also then adding additional limitations on what can happen with those properties at the local level, where with the state and national registers, they don't have any regulatory authority with those designations.
But Eric, that seems like if I'm a property owner, regardless of how much I value the historic nature of my property, I'm not going to agree to anything that might limit me in the future.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like signing up for an easement on your house. Like nobody's
Nobody would do that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's why we need to be focused in what it is that we're talking about, and the properties we're looking at, the specific criteria that might be included in some sort of design review, again, or whatever it is. I'm defaulting to the term of design review as a generic term for either design, historic, whatever type of district or protection we identify.
I think I'm a little bit finding a little bit of frustration with this, though, because like I understand the steps that need to happen here, but the way that we've built this, it seems like it's an almost impossible task, and yet Winooski is actually one of the few municipalities I know of its size that doesn't have it. Like that's a little dumbfounding to me.
Well, it got rid of it in 2015. Winooski
So
chose.
what about this for a potential solution, or at least a next step, is that we find out, as Mike requested from the lawyers, can we issue those districts based on the 2014 and move forward from there? If we can, then we can quickly go ahead and do what we need to do. In the meantime, I think that these incentives are fine, but it doesn't get to the meat of the problem.
Yeah.
Well, I think Joe mentioned it. Are folks willing to kind of just either walk around or off the top of your head, come up with some properties that they think should be priorities for us to save? So in other words, important historic structures, and whether it's, you know, whoever lives on the east side, kind of look at properties there, people on the west side look over there. Sarah, since you're downtown.
Yeah, Mike, I think it's another scenario of where like we're not ultimately qualified to be doing that because it would be like our impressions. I mean, I think that's community input for like a consultant doing it. But
So I guess two things, Joe. One is, yeah, let's get what Britta, the report from Britta, so we all see that. But we can come up with some properties we think and talk about it, and doesn't mean that they're necessarily there, but at least we're identifying some properties, maybe like the RVA or Winooski block,
yeah,
St. Stephen's Church, St. Francis Church, you know, things like that.
well, and that's what I'm saying before is because we're a pretty small city, I don't understand why the city, for this matter, is not considered a district, and then an inventory could be done in totality.
Yeah.
Instead of doing like a street, like that seems to be, because we keep harping on like the same few things, and then things that are in the periphery get missed continually.
Yeah.
And I guess all I'm saying is maybe as a start, we as a
Right.
commission just say, hey, these are properties that we see that we think are important. They may not pan out to be, but you know, like my house, I think is important. Well, no, it's not, right?
Well, and that's usually what it is people typically consider the house that they live in is not historic because like that, oh, it's just where I live.
Yeah.
You know, but to other people like in the community, like it's something that's contributing
Right.
to the sense of place.
And that goes to your point about the whole city, because I mean, you could take the whole West End from Mounts Bay Avenue down and say, you know,
Well, I
there's a
think
lot of
maybe
old.
we should go back and look at what the districts were originally and see what that was, and why did people choose to eliminate it? That's what I'm curious about.
Hey,
Maybe
Tommy,
there's
do
a
you
good reason.
remember? I don't remember having a specific conversation about dropping it.
No, I don't recall that either. In fact, I was racking my brain trying to, and I can't imagine that we would have recommended that it be deleted. I think that it was an
Yeah.
oversight, if anything.
That's
So
what
how
I
did it
think too.
happen then? I mean, then we need to know how that happened, because
Well, I think,
we
like
know
I
that
said,
that's true.
Sarah, what I think happened was we did the form-based code.
Yep.
We had the downtown that was purview of the city council, and there were some restrictions I recall. But we also put in language relying on the Vermont Historic Preservation, whatever council, thinking that they had the power to stop anyone from taking down anything on the Vermont Historic Register.
Which is
That's
this
my
language
recollection.
here under item D,
Gotta get
Right.
where
close
that
to it.
language came
Which
in.
we learned, 4 or 5 years ago that when we were going through the Mansion House stuff, that it's
Right.
irrelevant. None of this it doesn't, the state can't use it and we can't use it. So
And to me, that was a shock to me, because I thought that the historic preservation had teeth. It was on the
I did
state register. I thought it had teeth, and I think we all did. And that's why we left it there.
Eric can speak to this, I think, more articulately than I can, but the one scenario is that when you have federal funding being involved, and you also when you have an Act 250 is triggered, that is when there is some oversight on this. Am I speaking correctly on that?
I believe that's correct. That's my understanding as well.
Okay.
So could we figure out what buildings have had some federal funding, and then we could start with those? Because at least those will have slightly.
I'd like to see if we could take it back to the beginning and have it be, I like the idea of having the city be a district, but finding out what the lawyer says our options are, rather than trying to piecemeal it if we don't have to.
Well, I kind of wonder about like if it's like because the districts were of record, like it's almost like a parcel that existed, in land records, like it still can be identified as. Is that making any sense, Eric?
I mean, there's a record of where the boundaries were. I don't know what legal
Me-
what legal right those boundaries have to exist outside of a land use document.
I guess I think that's okay as far as like if we want to pursue that as like a step on this, but I myself would rather see because again, small city, just the whole city be looked at as a whole on this issue. Because I think it gets kind of weird and dangerous too when you're just kind of identifying like it feels like redlining when and I know that like there are higher concentrations of historic districts, but when you're saying that like, oh, you know, only the buildings on Main Street are important, but anyone who lives down in like the west side, like nothing down there is really important. Like that, I don't know. Does that make any
Mike, do
sense?
you, yeah, it does. And Mike, do you
Yeah.
remember? I don't remember it being those districts being parceled that way. I just, maybe it's my memory. Because I think we would have objected to that.
I think so too. And again, all I can think of is that we thought that I don't remember talking about the design districts.
No, I don't either.
And my recollection is that we were so confident that the language we used about if they were on the national or state register, they couldn't be taken down. We were
That's
told-
for my recollection.
Yeah. And
So-
then when it popped up with the mansion house, it was like, what? What do you mean there's no protection?
Just to like for my own knowledge, does anyone here know like so in Burlington, if you propose a project, I thought like that it all went through design review.
Well, I know that any building that's on a historic register goes through design review, and they've got multiple levels. Because the example I'll use is the building I used to own at 289 College Street.
Okay.
We sold that, and the guy that bought it, proposed putting an addition on it that reflected the original building.
Yeah.
And the design review board over there said, no, it's gotta be, it can't look anything like the original building, so it's a box.
Yeah.
Um,
So, but that likely would have been. I assume that being on College Street would have been in a district, but I can't think that. I can't think of like an area in Burlington that wouldn't be considered in a district. Like that's what I'm wondering about.
well,
Near-
probably,
near North End, maybe.
North End, yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
But even there, like, yeah, because I remember like there was out on Apple Tree Point, like the Stanford House, which was like one of the oldest structures in that part of the city, and a developer that was on like a 10-acre parcel, and developer wanted to raise it and put a development project in its place, and there was opposition to the demolition of that structure. And so what they did instead was a developer moved it somewhere else on the parcel and proceeded with his PUD.
I'm not sure, but I have a feeling that any, at least major development or redevelopment requires the design review. I think probably anything does, because I know they had, I don't know if they still do, but like vinyl siding.
Well, yeah, and that's Burlington's own kind of what they've.
Yeah. Right, but I think that was part of the design review whole process.
And I guess that this is what I'm feeling is like it feels like we're kind of stabbing in the dark here, and like we kind of know a course, but I'm just like, this is what I'm trying to figure out is like other municipalities are doing this, like, and I'm just wondering why it seems such an obstacle for Winooski.
Well, partly it can hinder development. I mean, right?
Well, I think going back to what Eric said, other towns have instituted these things, and to do it, you have to go through a process.
Mhm.
And
And
so,
we had some, but they got taken out when,
and that's why I asked to find out from our attorney if we could just reinstitute them or if we have to go through the whole process. And if we have to go through the whole process, I mean, I think I'm on your side, Joe. Let's look at the whole city.
yeah, I agree with that. I guess if we are going to ask the attorney something, we also should ask, was the getting rid of the design review district or the district was, where was that legally done? Was that legally done? I mean, who
That's a
voted
good
that?
question.
Well,
Who
Well,
voted that in, you
I
know?
think
I mean, I
because
would
we-
say it was legally done
Yeah.
because the regulations would have been adopted. So they were adopted as written. And if they were written without that, without those references in, then they would have been written out. I mean, it is an interesting question because we do have section 4.4 still in the regulations. We just
Right.
don't have a map that depicts any design review districts. So it's an interesting question.
I mean,
becau-
didn't you go through some of this, Eric, with the mansion house? I mean, you had to deal with some legal questions during that. Did you recall
not-
anything?
Well, you're really testing my memory there, Sarah. But I think it's important to keep in mind a zoning ordinance or any type of regulatory zoning, any type of land use document is two pieces. It's both the text and the map. So amendments can be made to either of them or both of them. And so it may be that because we have the text, we need to have a map that relates to it. So how about this? Why don't, in order to keep the conversation moving, I will spend some time doing some additional research, talking to our attorneys, looking at our past regulations, seeing what we had in place, what we have in place, what options are going forward. One thing I also want to look at is if we made the whole city a design review district, does that mean that every parcel has to fall under that review, which would then basically go against the whole reason why we put in the form-based code in the first place and making that an administrative process. So there's some other questions that I think I would like to get a better sense of what the answers are to myself, so I can help advise you all. In the interest of that, I think is the incentive approach is one that I know we can put in place now because it would be voluntary and it would apply to these specific properties. So what I would like to do is get any comments you have on these incentives while I review all these other pieces. And then we can, if we need to, we can make a bunch more changes to this as necessary. If we find out that in fact, yes, we can bring back those design review districts without any issue, that is something that's something I want to look into before we
Sure.
get too much further down the road in this conversation.
Yeah. I think it sounds like we kind of have consensus so that we like this. You've put together something admirable for us. It's just, it doesn't quite accomplish the objective though, that there will be more work required on this.
Do you feel okay? Does everyone feel okay with just trying to move the incentives forward as quickly as possible?
Yes.
The only issue I'm seeing here is that I'm not comfortable with the 25% or more of an existing structure, because that seems like pretty weak, but I'd be more like 50, but.
Yeah, and I'll say these are, I mean, I threw in some numbers that seemed
Sure.
like they might make sense. But I, definitely happy to make changes to this if there's changes that folks would like to see made.
Yeah.
And I was wondering why there was a difference in the percentage between the downtown core and the central business core. Or the central business district, I'm sorry, in the downtown core.
Right.
I mean, to me, maybe 50% and then going 100% in the residential zones.
So if you're saying, Mike, 50% of the downtown and 50% of the central business district.
And in the gateway.
So 50% in all of them except the residential.
Yeah, I mean, I just throw that as a thought. I don't know what other people think.
So
No,
the
I-
one thing,
I thought the same thing. Sorry,
does
go ahead.
sorry, does the 25%, does that keep a facade? Is that kind of what you're thinking, Eric?
Well, the way I've written it is that it has to include the facade.
Okay, it has to include the facade.
That's what I'm getting is that's one wall. 25% is kind of.
Yeah. But if we can save some facades, I mean, people may feel philosophically differently than I do, but I think that's great. if
Yeah,
we can.
facades are disproportionately important in my.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say for me though, like I'd say 50% because like at 25%, it's no longer a building anymore. It's a facade. Like that's
Right.
I don't know. That's just my
Eric, you said something about it has to include the facade. So this in C1, this inclusive of the facade, is that mean that the facade can be part of the 25%, or are you saying that in order to take advantage of this, you must keep the facade as it is?
So I guess I didn't have any specific examples of buildings in mind to do a calculation of the 25%, but my intent with this was that at a minimum, the facade of the building would be kept.
Right.
And that would have to be part of that 25%. But if we need to increase that or reword that, so it basically says you're required to keep the facade and a certain percentage of the rest of the building. I mean, that was really my intent with this, is so that we're saving the facades.
Yeah. I think I would flush that out more.
Yeah, because you think about the buildings on the west side of the roundabout, you know, where, well, I guess is Sneaker still there?
The Monkey House and Sneaker.
Yeah, those buildings, you know, they're pretty rough. I mean, the interiors of those and the apartments and whatnot upstairs. So I can imagine you could save that facade and rebuild the backs of them. And I would be happy with that. I don't know how Joe would feel if that would be.
I still feel like 50 because you're getting like a sense of like the footprint of the original structure, but it's still giving you enough like leeway that you can do something with it. I'm kind of picturing like what would be kind of nice to see in Winooski, and I think it probably will be done to some extent, is like, I always go back to this example on Main Street in Burlington, like the new Hotel Vermont, where they took the old armory and made it kind of like the entry to the new building. And I can see like with 50% of a building doing that successfully and still having new development that's serving need. Does that make sense?
I get it. I'm just trying to think practically in terms of a developer.
Eric, does this percentage, does that include is this just the exterior? Like what if you got the whole, you keep the outside exactly the same, but you totally change the inside? Is that maintaining 100% of the building?
That's a good question. I think I would say it is, but I
agree.
I think I can interject here, because like preservation guidelines do not extend to the interior of a building in any of these municipalities. So like, I mean, it would be the percentage you're talking about are the exterior elements of the building.
Yeah. So maybe you just of the exterior, 25% or more of the exterior. I might just say that.
I don't think I'm gonna say, like, I don't think 25% works for me, because like,
right. Yeah, I'm not going to the number.
I'm just thinking, like, for instance, like if you demolished 75% of St. Stephen's Church and left the front, you're not getting much. Like, you might as well have just taken the whole building down. Like, that doesn't work. So I don't know.
Well, that's in the residential district, Joe, so they'd have to save 100% of it to get the incentive. So sorry. But anyway, so the incentives, the approach of incentives is you're for the tools that we have available to us, this is one that you're comfortable with right now. Is that in general terms, not necessarily these specific numbers, but in general terms?
Yes,
I think so. And like you said, I think someone said, making it clear that the facade must remain.
Yep. Yeah, I'll clarify that in this language as well. Okay, any other?
Minor detail. Number 4, you have a typo in the word preserve instead of persevere.
Oh. Thank you very much.
Creative.
Damn spell check.
Let's see.
Yeah, it doesn't tell you when it's the right word. It's just the wrong. It's in the wrong spot.
Eric, what's the math look like on like 1B? Up to 25% of the gross square footage of the preserved building footprint is incorporated maybe used towards the requirement for private open space. Like, how does that math pan out in terms of what, you know, saving a historic building means for open space on the property?
Yeah, that's a good question. And again, this is where the numbers may not make sense. I think what I was thinking of is a way to say that if you're saving the building and potentially resetting the required building line, then the site itself might have some other limitations to it. So you may not be able to get in all the private open space that's required. So this would be a way to provide some relief from the open space requirement by saving a portion of this existing building. So again, I don't know if that's the right percentage, but it seemed like there should be some level of trade-off for what might happen with the site, and to ensure that the required elements that are in the form-based code could still be met while still saving the building.
That does kind of make sense, because if you have like a building that's non-conforming to begin with that you're working with.
Right.
I'm wondering if a more appropriate thing, instead of tackling open space, is like some relief from the RBL. You know how like in the gateway, you have a massing of your building along the RBL. It's like you have to take up most of your RBL with your building massing.
Yep.
If we're trying to save historic properties, they're probably not massed appropriately for form-based code, and maybe relief from those massing requirements would both enable them to save a historic building and then not take away from open space on the site.
So you're thinking more than just what's identified in item A as far as moving the RBL. You're thinking more about how much of the RBL needs to be filled with building.
Yeah, because essentially, like if they took, let's just use like the Mansion Street property, right? In order to redevelop that, they'd have to put buildings up against both sides of it to fill up the RBL, so that we had a building that massed on the property in a way that complies with the form-based code. So to me, it makes more sense to give them relief off of that massing than it does to make them mass it up like that and then decrease the open space on the site.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yep. Okay.
Like that.
Thank you, Abby.
Okay, anything else on this? And again, we'll get to look at this again in the future at future meetings, but I want to be cognizant of the time and try to move us along if we can. Any other thing that jumps out at you right now that's maybe of concern or you think we should look at again, other than what we just talked about?
Oh, I was trying to follow if people like the step up, the 25, 50, 75, 100, or were we trying to do like a 50% and 100%? Where did people fall with the percentage of the building?
To me, it sounded like we landed on 50 for everything except the residential, and then the residential was 100%. That's what I thought that I had heard, but I'll defer to the group.
So if we go from 25 to 50, so let's just use the example of the west side of the roundabout, those buildings. So you have to save the facade at the 25%. So what else in there would you need to, what other 25% of that would be, can we envision? What would you save? How would you do that architecturally? And
It sounds like, Sarah, like those numbers might be flipped. Is it like gateway zoning district should be more like 50 and downtown core should be more like the 25%, where you're talking about really dense facades, like what you're, is that, are we kind of on the
I think
same track?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what it is that we're.
Well, so the buildings that you're thinking of, Sarah, are not in the downtown core district. They're in the central business district.
Okay.
So maybe if I could throw in, maybe we identify, the facade as being 25% of the building. So that's set.
Right.
And then it's in addition to that, And the exception would be buildings that have common walls.
Mhm.
So you're talking about the buildings on Main Street. Maybe it's just the facade for those buildings,
Right.
you know, so it's an exception. The facade must stay and up, you know, 50%, the facade accounts for
Yeah,
25% of
I
buildings.
see what you're saying, Mike, because when it's a freestanding structure versus a co-joined structure, that's where it
Right.
makes a difference.
Right,
Right.
And
Yeah,
we
I
don't
agree.
have a whole lot of those besides that little strip.
right. And that's why you
Which is
just
also
make
why
it-
I'm trying to, I
There's
really
some-
want
yeah,
to
there's
save that
some
little
on-
strip.
There's some on Mallets Bay Avenue, but yeah,
Yeah.
as you said,
Yeah.
and that's why I'm saying you
Yeah.
just make those an exception, except for buildings with common walls that, you know, require just the facade or something like that.
Yeah. Good, good.
Eric, how would this apply to like the Champlain Mill, though? I mean, can
Well,
they just keep the facade of that building and that's enough?
That
That's
one-
a federal, that's got federal money in it.
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
50%.
So
They
they
have to
need to
keep
keep
them
at least
two walls.
50% of the building in that
I mean,
case.
That's in the
This is-
downtown core.
This is
Yeah.
not perfect, guys. This
No,
is
it's
just
not.
trying to
Right.
get something
Yeah.
before it's all gone, frankly. That's how I feel.
Because that, I mean, I'll frankly say it like that. Like when I think about this, I'm thinking about like the Champlain Mill and the Woolen Mill and the buildings on the
Block.
west side of the circle
Mhm.
Winooski
and
Block, yeah.
Winooski Block. I think
So to add to what you're-
that's what I'm really concerned about.
to add to what you're saying, Brendan, and why we're even talking about this very issue in our zoning laws is that every one of those buildings was threatened with
Right.
demolition at one point.
Yeah.
It was real. So like,
Joe, I'm in agreement. What I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
what I'm saying is like to me it's a little like I'm more concerned with the downtown than maybe like some of the residential areas, I guess, you
Well,
know.
and this is kind of where like in municipalities that have a design review board, you can kind of like rank that where you can say like, hey, this is a highly visible building that's very iconic for the city versus like, oh, this is a well-preserved structure, but does it really have the same level of importance?
Yeah.
Whereas we're kind of having to navigate that here.
Yeah, no, I'm not trying to trivialize it at all, Joe. I don't mean I haven't tried to sound that.
I don't get that sense, Brenda. I'm just
And I also, again,
you
I just want to say, I've been bugging city council about this stuff for probably 5 or 6 years now. And I feel like right now, this incentive stuff, that may be all we're going to get for the day. So we can keep working on the rest of it, but I really want to get this stuff through. I think it's
okay.
so.
Yep. Duly noted.
Okay, any other thoughts or comments on this? This has been good discussion.
Eric, can you
Gives
just go up to the beginning of this
Yeah.
section? Because I just want to again look at the wording for the tie-in to the master plan, as well as the intent here is for us to, you know, we have concerns about losing historic properties. So I just want to make sure that and I would say this under A, the city of Winooski's master plan. I think you either need to put parentheses plan and use the word plan throughout the rest of that, or at the end of that line, it says throughout the plan. Make sure you identify the master plan. You know what I mean? So.
Oh,
so
yeah.
So it's not, no one can take it out of context and say, well, what do you mean? What's the plan? It doesn't say master plan.
Right, got it.
And when I read this, I thought it was fine and it got the intent through and what we're trying to do. I just want to make sure everyone looks at it and is in agreement.
Yep, it looked good to me.
And thanks, Eric, for doing that, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you just go to that next page? Is it say up to or at least 25%? How is that
Should say at a minimum,
at a minimum? Okay.
or that was the intent anyway,
25% or more. Gotcha. Okay.
or yeah. Okay, Yes, more to come on all this. So, but thank you very much. This has been good conversation.
So Eric,
Yep.
it's 7:48.
Okay.
So I don't know if you want to finish up anything in this article or just move to the concluding meeting stuff.
I'll leave that all up to you. If you all want to keep going. I think most of the rest of the section, with the exception of parking, we've already talked
Yeah.
about, and there's not much.
And I don't think we're gonna start talking about parking right now because we'll be here till 10.
Well, how about this? Why don't we go through the rest of this and then stop at parking? So then we
Okay.
really just have the section 4.4 and section 4.12 for our next meeting.
Okay,
So I think we can get through the rest of this fairly quick because like I said, not much of it has changed,
right.
if at all, from the last time you all have seen this. So 4.5 equal treatment of housing, nothing new here. That's all the same as before. Fences and walls, I don't believe any of this is new from the last time you saw it. Really what I'm basically saying here is that, so we exempt fences and walls from our regulations as long as they're 6 feet or less in height, with the exception of properties against the gateway, which you can do 8 feet in height, which is all spelled out here. But what I wanted to do is make it more clear that any wall that was incorporated to basically be a retaining wall over a certain size needed to get a permit so that it can be reviewed for so that it's engineered properly and constructed properly, that it's actually going to function the way it should, or if it's against a public right of way or public walkway, just because of some of the issues we've had in other places with walls against city property and maintenance of city property. And then finally, this last item D, this may be new. I just wanted to differentiate between a project that was being designed that had retaining walls in it. And I'm thinking about like Cassavant Overlook on East Allen Street. They have some pretty good retaining walls on the back of that property. I wouldn't need them to come in with a separate application just for the wall when they're getting the entire site permitted with the walls included in that project. So that's what item D is for in that case.
Eric, I think I probably asked you this before and I don't have the full regulation in front of me. Fences and walls are defined someplace in the regulations?
They should be, yes. They should be.
Okay. Can
I
you-
will double check on that though too.
Yeah, because if they're not, they need to be defined so people know what we're talking about.
Yep. Okay, next is landscaping and screening. I don't think anything here has changed. We did talk about this language in the last couple of meetings, and I believe this we discussed last time or the time before and got to what the issue was. So yeah, I don't think anything new there. Let's see. That's all still the same. Natural resources and open space. No changes proposed here. Sorry for the scrolling. Again, stop me if you need me to. Non-conforming lots and structures and right-of-ways. This is all still the same as what we previously discussed, adding this fourth item to make sure that there's clear title of the property that's been recorded in the city's land records. One item that I was thinking about potentially adding is under non-conforming structures, is a number 5 to talk about change of use in non-conforming structures, just so there's an acknowledgement that a structure, even if it's non-conforming, may still change the use, and how we would address the use change in a non-conforming structure. We talk about non-conforming uses, we talk about non-conforming structures, but we don't talk about changes of use in non-conforming structure. So I'm thinking about adding that language in this section under item number 5. So there'll be new language for the next time with that.
So the other thing, Eric, I don't know if I feel like we went through this a little bit before. Did we get kind of an idea of how many structures we're talking about? We did go through that, right? In the city.
That are non-conforming?
Yeah. right?
I know we've talked about non-conforming lots. I don't know if we've talked about non-conforming structures specifically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I recall we asked, it's like how many undeveloped non-conforming lots are there? I
Right,
think
we didn't do the structures.
Yeah, I don't think we've done the structures.
Wouldn't it be interesting to have a number on the structures?
I mean, that might take a little bit of work, but I can, I
Sorry.
can see what I can do.
we have a lot of non-conforming
Thousands.
structures, I think. Yeah.
Well, it just gives you an idea of what we're talking about. Indeed,
And, I mean, we also have a lot of non-conforming
Non-conforming
uses
lots.
as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
We have a lot of non-conforming uses, a lot of non-conforming structures, and a lot of non-conforming lots right now. So, so sometimes it makes me wonder why the regulations are written as they are, especially with the dimensional standards. But that's for another day. So anyway,
Mhm.
more to
Inertia
come
is
in
a
the
powerful
non-conforming
thing.
section. Let's see. Next up, nothing new here in that language. Outdoor lighting. This was I believe we talked about this at the last meeting as well to better get to the point that this isn't really intended for residential single unit, 2-unit developments unless it's in a PUD in those districts. So this is really going to apply to everything else. The downtown and the gateway have their own lighting standards, so this is really more for those other districts.
So just a typo,
Oh.
Eric, on the third line, when it starts in red, are you saying on the same lot twice?
Oh, yes, I am. Oh, you know what? That's interesting because, my version does not say that,
Oh,
but it's the same version that I sent out. So maybe I saw that and changed it.
that must be it.
But anyway, yes, thank you for noting that. I'll just flag that to make sure it's taken care of it the next time. Okay. Oh, whoops. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong page. Yes, it's there. Okay, so then that same language is carried over under outdoor storage and mechanical equipment. And then I added some additional language on 3 for the screening so that it's for year-round coverage. I believe it said something with like sufficient coverage or something, some other generic language previously. So, and then that gets us to parking.
Great.
So, okay, so at our next meeting, I will hopefully have some more information for you all on historic preservation and what that looks like and how the design review district component fits in or does not fit in, based on hopefully a legal opinion at that point.
Perfect.
And then
All
we
right.
can get into parking.
All right.
And I'll just say in advance, I did, just so you all know, I did have a meeting with Abby a week or so ago to talk through the draft parking language. She provided some really good edits that I've incorporated, and also a couple of points for discussion at our next meeting when we get into that language. So thank you, Abby, for your help with those edits.
Eric, the parking study and Britta's historic survey are on the website?
That's a good question. I know the parking study is actually, I'm not sure if it's on our website. I know it's on the Regional Planning Commission's website, since they're the ones that actually technically conducted the study on our behalf.
Yeah.
But what I can do is I will see if we have it somewhere, either in our it may be, I think it's linked into one of our council agendas. So what I can do is send out that link and the RPC link, but then also Sarah, I forgot to do this. Sarah asked me to send out the report that VHB did, Britta's report to you all, since some of you either probably haven't seen that or don't remember or don't have a copy of it. So I will send a link to both of those documents
Perfect.
for you all to have.
All right. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any city updates, Eric?
Yeah, just a couple things for updates. the Festival of Pumpkins is coming up. So I believe next weekend they are going to be doing all the carving. So I believe they need some help with both carving and picking potentially. So I'm sure there's going to be some information being sent out from the city on the volunteer options for folks and also the event itself. But that'll be then I think the following weekend. Halloween weekend is when the actual event will take place.
Yep.
Let's see, I'm trying to think. Oh, the city approved their first retail cannabis license. We're still waiting on the state's approval on that though, before we can issue the retail license, but there is the old Lofts Deli, 165 East Allen Street is where they're looking to establish that use. So once the state issues their license, or if the state issues their license, the city has already reviewed that at their last, I guess I should say at our first Cannabis Control Commission meeting. So that may be the first.
That lot's not gonna get redeveloped. Nobody's looking at redeveloping that
Become
one.
very, very profitable very quickly.
Yeah, I think probably will.
I'm just saying, there's a property that could be redeveloped, wouldn't hurt anything.
Right.
Yeah. So is it going to be a grow and sell operation? Like they grow on that site and sell it?
They will only be able to sell. They will not be able to grow there.
Okay.
So I don't believe the state allows for both licenses to occur on the same site. Well, I know they allow for multiple license types on the same site, but I think retail is the only one that they don't allow another type of license to occur. So the cultivator, the manufacturer, the processor, I don't think they can also have a retail license on the same site. I think the same person can have, the same entity can have multiple licenses, but they have to be in different locations.
Okay.
And those are really the only two things that come to mind right now for me. I was thinking the mayor might be here to provide some other updates, but that's all I have for city updates.
Was it discussed at the last meeting? I didn't see it in the minutes about the hiring of the, was it housing incentives director?
There is, well, so we did not discuss it at the last meeting. I know the city has, I believe we've advertised for a housing incentive director, I think is what the position is called. I have not seen the formal job announcement about it, or at least the job description. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of information on that position.
Oh, okay. Because I read about it in the community newsletter, and
okay.
My impression was that it sounded like we already had somebody, so I didn't know.
No, not yet. Not yet. I know they were working on finalizing the job description, getting that out for hopefully to get applicants. And so I guess just a little more on that. This position will replace our community and economic development officer position. You may know Heather Carrington. For those of you who know her, the position that she held will be, for lack of a better word, going away, and the housing initiatives director would basically fill that role. Obviously different role, but would take that position.
Okay. And so
Other
I
business.
assume that we would be working pretty closely with that. Is that individual going to be like part of our commission meetings?
That's a good question. I don't know yet. I'm guessing a lot of what they will do will work through the Housing Commission, and then the Housing Commission would forward recommendations or different options to us to look at for including in the land use regulations when it's pertinent to land use. But I don't know a lot of the specifics on how that's going to function, and it may be that still needs to, that's going to kind of be figured out when the person is onboarded.
Okay. I was just
Other
gonna
business. Eric, do you want to talk about our next meeting?
Well, first, I do have a little bit of other business. I did receive an email request from a resident or property owner, at least, asking the Planning Commission to consider reducing the lot size for the residential C zoning district to 5,000 square feet, or even for the residential B district for a 50-foot frontage and a 75-foot depth and a 5,000 square foot lot size. basically saying that there's a lot of lots in the city that are between 0.07 to basically 3,000 square foot to 7,500 square feet. And so basically asking for us to consider looking at the dimensional standards for the residential zoning districts. And then similarly, they also requested that the Planning Commission look at extending the townhouse small apartment zoning district or building form standard in the Gateway zoning district further out Mallets Bay Avenue. Right now, let me real quick if I can. So let me.
Eric, we have a 10,000, yeah, there's a lot of non-conforming lots, but we have a 10,000 square foot minimum in R, A, B, and C.
So right now, the residential A is 10,000 square feet, the residential B, and I believe the C as well are both 7,500 square
right?
feet.
Okay.
Yeah, they're both
And
75.
we had this discussion. I mean, we talked about this already.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it was at the very beginning of our sort of housing push. This was one of the things we talked about that we didn't end up doing.
Right.
Didn't we push that to council for their approval?
Well, so we did end up amending the residential C dimensions, but not the square footage.
Right.
So just for on the other request for the Gateway portion, so you can see here, Mallets Bay Avenue, the building form standards, the orange is the urban general, the red is the storefront, the urban storefront. The blue is the townhouse small apartment, and the yellow is the detached frontage. And these go from levels of intensity from more intense to least intense as you go out the corridor. So basically the request here is to extend this townhouse small apartment further out the corridor. Doesn't say how far they'd like it to go, but they just would like it to go further out the corridor.
This is a property owner?
They do own property. They do own property along Mallets Bay Avenue as well.
Are they residents of Winooski or are they?
That's a good question. I don't know if they live here or not.
Did they give their name? I mean, we have to give.
Well, we can look that up.
Yeah.
I would. So
No, I'm just
anyway,
wondering, is it a resident or is
Right.
it a?
It's like how
So-
cagey are they being?
they've
Yeah.
given me their name. I'm choosing not to give you their name. So I know who it is, but I don't know if they live in the city or not.
But you know
So-
what, whether they're property owners right there or not, or if you look at that, there's like what, 6 or 8 lots that are in the townhouse.
Yeah, it's pretty small.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
kind of small.
It's like,
Yeah.
why even do it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
It's weird.
but we
Well,
can,
their
But again,
request though
we can
is
take
was
it up
put-
at some other time.
It was put there for a reason, that.
right,
small
and their request
designation.
is to make more of Mallets Bay Avenue that townhouse small apartment.
Yeah.
So because it has more development intensity,
Well,
that's anyway. They
Well,
submitted
as
a
I
request to
recall,
me.
one of the issues was the topography along Mount Bay Avenue.
Right. So anyway, just so that's out there, they
Okay.
submitted the request to me. As part of the process, I bring it to you all for consideration, and we can take this up at a future meeting or say thank you very much. We are going to decline your request at this time. So anyway, I brought it forward to you all.
Yes. you did your job.
The other thing I wanted to bring up under other business. So I know we talked previously about potentially, we took some time off to just do one meeting a month. Now that we're in October, we had talked about going back to 2 meetings a month. If we do a second meeting, if we do go back to 2 meetings a month, we would do a meeting on October 27th. And then our November meeting would be November 10th. And then we wouldn't have a second meeting in November because it falls on Thanksgiving. So, and then pick up again in December. I think only 1 meeting in December again. So I don't know if we want to do 2 meetings now and then 1 meeting November, 1 meeting December, or just do 1 meeting, just do only 1 meeting in October, 1 in November, 1 in December, and then maybe pick up 2 meetings again in January. Not sure how folks are feeling with, I know how Abby's feeling now with that meeting schedule. But I think once we start getting into the discussions on parking and revisiting some of these discussions on historic preservation, I think having 2 meetings a month is going to be more beneficial as it'll help with the continuity of discussion. So
it would only change one meeting then for the rest of the
Yeah,
year.
it's just,
Basically,
do we
yeah.
want a meeting in 2 weeks or not? That's basically what we're
I
asking
would
right
just say
now.
we revisit this in January, like.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and that's
Okay.
fine. I just wanted to put that out there. The other thing we should probably talk about as well is if we're going to try to do any in-person meetings or go to hybrid or just keep it remote. Because I think in January, we're no longer going to be able to do remote only based on the legislature or the guidance they provided last session. So that will be coming to an end at some point. So that doesn't mean that you all have to be in the room, but it means that I need to be in the room at least. So
So, and a hybrid is either in person or you can join on Zoom.
yep, there needs to be, the way statute's written for open meeting is that we need to have a location where the public can join the meeting.
Yeah.
Which is at City Hall. It's been written in the past that a member of the commission needs to attend that meeting in person as well, but that's, I believe, been changed. I believe statute was changed to say that a member of the commission or staff or something else so that the commission members don't have to show up either. But somebody needs to be in the room to manage the meeting.
I'm gonna throw out for the rest of the year, we try a hybrid. And that way people can, we can show up if we want, or we can do it on Zoom.
Yeah,
Yeah, let's do that.
most other groups that I belong to that are having board meetings are kind of doing the hybrid model now at this point. I do feel that if we can, I mean, and this is what I think the statute is dictating, is it's slightly discriminatory if we just could, this is for, a dire pandemic situation that we're doing this, but if we just were doing this, it's slightly discriminatory because if you don't have access to a computer or, you can't participate in these meetings.
Mhm.
And at the same time, though, too, Joe, to that point, having in-person meetings is also can be challenging for access because people need to find childcare, they need to get there. There's other issues with the in-person option as well.
I hear you. It's just slightly more encompassing, I guess.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
the hybrid meeting may be a little challenging to manage, but that's not for you all to worry about. That's for me to figure out how the logistics of that'll run. But either way, I'm happy to do it.
So Eric, after January, the legislature is saying they all have to be in person, but can it still be a hybrid so that folks who
Yes,
can't get there can join on Zoom?
it can still be hybrid. What the legislature has, what will be expiring, or at least as far as I understand it, it will be expiring, is the option to do remote only.
I gotcha. Okay.
Unless
So
there's
it'll-
another outbreak.
Right, exactly. We'll see what the legislature says when they come back in session, but that's,
Yeah.
that will
So our
expire.
next meeting is gonna be November 10th then.
November 10th. Yep.
And that'll be hybrid, like we'll be able to go to City Hall and
Yep.
do it there if we want to.
If that's
Yep.
how you want to do it, we can do it that way.
It's like the old
Let's-
times.
Eric, let's do this. Let's plan on doing a hybrid. If something comes up where you can't logistically get it going for some reason, technically, whatever, let us know and we'll just do the Zoom.
Okay,
Okay.
sounds good.
But otherwise, we'll plan on hybrid, and anyone who wants to go to City Hall can, anyone that wants to join on Zoom can. All right, any other business from anyone?
Well, I had one other item real
Oh,
quick. Well,
all
maybe
right.
not real quick, but I just wanted to, I received an email from both Abby and Sarah about a speculative real estate development out on East Allen Street. So I don't know if others have seen that, but it's the property's right next to CCB. It shows a rendering of a potential building on those sites. And as far as I can tell, there's not dimensions shown with it. So I don't have the specific details, but as far as I can tell, the building that's shown most likely could not be built based on our regulations. So if you see that, don't presume that what they're showing is something that's been permitted. There's no permits on the
Right.
properties. There's been no applications. There's nothing that's been submitted. So
They-
if you
they
do
did-
see
they did
those,
have permits, but they expired, right?
that's correct. They had
Right.
permits for a
They were
previous
saying they were gonna
project.
build 150 to 175 unit building.
Yep.
Yeah,
I mean,
so
I was sent that link by a friend who was like, what is this? And I'm
yeah,
like,
it was in the real estate.
and I didn't even respond to it because I kind of knew that like that had not gone
It-
through any.
right.
I thought it
There's
was
been
sort of funny, right? It's like-
there's been no discussion or there's been no
Terrifying.
applications or any formal action taken by the property owners. So what's being shown is very speculative. And as I'm looking at the renderings, again, I don't have dimensions or any specific numbers with it. What I've seen, I don't believe would meet our code.
What's interesting about it though is that they couldn't sell it when it was permitted, and now they're trying to do the same thing without it permitted. Like that's kind of a, I don't know.
I think the issue before, Joe, was that they didn't own all the properties. And there
Okay.
was one of the property owners in the middle was not, either wanted more money or didn't want to sell or something. So they couldn't make the project work without having all the property. And now I believe they do own all the property.
And weren't those properties in the historic district, the little brick mill buildings there?
I don't know if they're they are listed. I don't know if there's
They're
a
listed,
district down
right?
there, but several of them are listed.
So they're all gonna go.
Yeah.
We're not saving those.
But anyway, in case you do see those renderings, rest assured, there's no applications that are going to allow that to happen. And chances are that design is not consistent with our regulations.
Any other business, Eric?
Oh, Abby, sorry, did you want to say something?
I was just wondering if there's any updates on the St. Stephen's property. Has somebody bought it? Are they working?
It hasn't
on
it hasn't closed yet.
Okay.
There is a contract for sale and it was extended, I think, to November for due
Okay.
diligence.
Gotcha, thanks.
Any other business? Anyone care to make a motion to adjourn, or do you want to stay all night?
So moved.
Joe?
I'll second.
Second, Tommy. And any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you,
Great.
Eric. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Marielle, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you in
Thank you all
November.
very much. We'll see you in November.